Good afternoon, everyone. I am Sean Nardell. I'm the Associate Director of Graduate Career Services, which is a part of the Graduate Center, which is a part of the Graduate College, which is just a lot of graduate going on there. I'm very excited today to start off this fall semester with our Preparing for Faculty Job Application Workshop series. And I couldn't be more excited today to have the person who starts this off and who says it's also his happy part of starting off the fall semester, Dr. Vignesh Subbian, who is truly a friend of the Graduate Center. He has a PhD in computer science and engineering from the University of Cincinnati as a former Midwesterner, go Midwest, and a master's in electrical engineering from the University of Alabama in Huntsville. He is an associate professor in college engineering with appointments in the Department of Biomedical Engineering and the Departments of Systems and Industrial Engineering. He's also a member of the Bio 5 Institute and the Statistics Graduate Interdisciplinary Program. He's also a distinguished fellow of the Center for University Educational Scholarship. So he's a very busy person who has lots of amazing diverse interests that I will not go on to. He's incredibly well published. Google would not let me go through the entire list. I swear it was too long. But what he's going to talk to you today about really is a wonderful overview of all the different academic pathways that are out there for you. And with that, I'm going to just stop talking and turn it over to Vignesh.
Thank you so much, Sean, for the very kind introduction. Hello, everybody. Good to see so many of you here. If you're comfortable, please turn on your cameras. If you're not, that's totally fine. I also request on your Zoom on participant list, if you could right-click your name. And if you're a postdoctoral scholar, if you could add a PhD next to your name so that I know the scholars in our Zoom room and your field or discipline, if you'd like to do that. Grad students, if you could also do the same, right-click your name on Zoom and add the discipline. That will give me a quick overview of what are the different disciplines represented. Although, as Sean mentioned, I'm in the College of Engineering, I will be very cautious about being inclusive about all disciplines and trying to make sure that we cover as many pathways as possible. So this is, I believe, the 8th time I'm doing this workshop series or kicking off this workshop series. So there's lots of historical knowledge. And I want to thank everybody who have participated in the past, who have given a lot of feedback and good questions. So every year we have more good questions for us to have a conversation about. And I always start with saying two things. One is academia is for you if you'd like it to be. So it's all about how you see academia as an enterprise for building your career. The second, which I don't say very often, but I'd like to start saying it from this session, is whether it's academia, industry, or government jobs, or a startup, it is a spectrum. Academia by itself is a spectrum. There's so much diversity in the types of positions and the careers you could build. Tenure track position is not the only pathway. There are many, many pathways. So keep the spectrum model in mind as we talk about the different pathways. So having said that, thanks to some of you who were able to add your discipline to your Zoom names. I encourage others to do it if you're comfortable. I'm going to share my screen and get started. So as you can see, one of the titles for this initial workshop session is Paving Pathways Beyond PhD, but we can also call it Academic Pathways. And our goal for today, in the next 70 to 90 minutes, we are going to explore different academic career pathways. There are other inherent goals for the entire workshop series, which is developing an awareness of the overall process of applying and interviewing for academic position. What are the various components of the application? We will barely scratch the surface for those two. We are mostly going to focus on the keyword here is pathways. What are the different pathways? There will be lots of times for questions and discussions. So we'll get to the pathways as soon as we can. So I want to open up and ask, how many institutions of higher education do you think we have in the United States? Just a rough ballpark. You can either speak up or put it in chat. How many institutions of higher education do we have in the United States? Lots, 4,000 plus, 5,000, over 2,000, 9,000, 5,000. Okay, I think we have established it's in the thousands. So it is somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000. It changes every year on new institutions opening up, some institutions closing up, but let's settle on around 4,000 institutions of higher education. And as Alicia mentioned at the very beginning, that's a lot. That's a lot of institutions. That means a lot of careers, a lot of positions for us to explore. So the first thing we need to do is we need some frameworks to think about what are those types of institutions. So I'm going to give you a couple of them, because that's important for each of us to decide which institutions you want to be a part of. So the first framework, and those of you who are from education or higher education will already know this, so bear with us. One framework is the Carnegie classification of institutions for higher education. And there are 3 levels. One of them is, the first level is research universities. So these are, as the name says, they have a lot of research activity, and that's the core part of their mission. And within that, there is 3 sub-levels: highest research activity, higher research activity, and moderate research activity. The University of Arizona is an R1, which means a university with the highest research activity. And so is our sister institution down the road in our neighboring city. So that's one level. Then the next is M1 to N3, which is master's colleges or universities. So the highest degree that they offer is master's degrees for most disciplines. And then you have 4-year and 2-year colleges and universities, which offer baccalaureate or BS or BA or any bachelor degrees, and then community colleges, which offer 2-year degrees, such as associate degrees. So that's one framework to think about. Is it a research university versus a master's versus a bachelor's offering college or university? There are 2 other frameworks that we need to keep in mind. One is how are these institutions governed? What's the governance structure? So the common classification is public versus private. This used to be of high relevance in the past. When you say a public university, it generally means that it's funded by the government. That is no longer the case. The government doesn't fully fund public universities, but they do support and govern public institutions. And then you have private, and I have a key word here, it's nonprofit. We are going to restrict all of our conversations to nonprofit private universities. We will not talk about private for-profit institutions in this workshop series. So, and I'll tell you why the governance is important as you think about your careers. The other framework is who do these organizations or institutions serve. So there's one broad classification called minority serving institutions. And the 3 common MSIs or minority serving institutions are Hispanic serving or HSI, historically Black colleges and universities or HBCUs, and tribal colleges and universities or TCUs. So HBCUs and TCUs are established, meaning that you cannot become an HBCU or TSU. You are already established as a tribal college or a historically Black college or university. On the other hand, Hispanic serving, an institution can become an Hispanic serving institution depending upon the kinds of students they enroll, the demographics of the students. So why do these three different classifications, the Carnegie classification, or whether it's public or private, whether it's a minority serving institution, why does it matters to us? So there are a few things that are different among these institutions. One is the expectations are going to be different for faculty or even for scientists. We can also be scientists or scientists in a university. So the expectations are going to be different. Institutional culture is going to be different in a public university versus a private university. The funding portfolio or eligibility might be different. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you are a historically Black college or university, there are specific funding opportunities just for HBCUs or just for HSIs. So there might be different funding portfolios that you might pursue as a scholar or as a researcher or as an educator. And then finally, the student body is also going to be different if it's a public versus private, or if it's going to be an HSI versus an HBCU. So keep these 4 points in mind as you think about what is the type of institution that you want to be a part of as you select your organizations. Feel free to put any comments, thoughts on chat at any time, and Sean and I will monitor them and get them answered before we leave today. So those are some frameworks for types of institution. Just to contextualize that, I'm going to give you a couple examples. So this is the mission of the University of Arizona, to continuously improve how we educate and innovate so we can lead the way for developing disruptive problem solvers capable of tackling our greatest challenges. So the University of Arizona is a public land grant Hispanic serving institution. We are also a research institution with highest research activity, which means this word innovate actually means research. That's what innovate actually means. The research is the key component. And the other part is educating the next generation. So education and research are the two key elements that define the mission of the University of Arizona. But let's look at our collaborator across the street, which is Pima Community College, to provide affordable, comprehensive educational opportunities that support student success and meet diverse needs of its students and the community. So the keywords here are education and community. They serve the community around us, and their purpose is just educating them, providing fundamental education for the growth of individuals in the community. So you can see the mission is very different from the University of Arizona and the Pima Community College. Although education overlaps, the type of education we offer is different, and we put more emphasis on research, whereas in the community college, there's little to no research emphasis. So Alicia and Theodora, we see the questions on the chat. We'll get to that in just a second. As we go through the pathways, we are going to talk about how are these different from each other, what are the expectations. We need some common terminologies to characterize those pathways. So I'm going to pick a few categories that we can use for differentiating each pathway. So when you think about what's an expectation of a faculty member or an individual working at an institution of higher education, one of them is going to be research, discovery, and innovation broadly. So this involves independently or in collaboration with others, formulating and executing ideas. And the key here is generating new knowledge and disseminating them. That's going to be one big piece. And then we also have teaching and service. Teaching includes not just the traditional teaching of courses, but it's also teaching outside the classrooms, mentoring undergraduate students or graduate students in research, promoting their career and professional development. And what I'm doing currently for the 70 to 90 minutes also falls under my teaching and mentoring. And then service. Service involves service to the smallest unit you're a part of, which is usually your division or department. And then above that, you have your college or school. And then you have service to your university, service to your local community around the university, and service to the professional society. So professional societies are highly dependent on the discipline. So I'm going to pick, I see linguistics somewhere. So I'm sure there are a couple of linguistics professional societies. So any service that you do to your professional society falls under that. So, sorry. So these three components, research, discovery, innovation, teaching, and service, are we're going to mix and match them for different pathways that we're going to see during this session. So keep this framework in mind as we go through them. Let's see. I'm going to address Alicia's question there. Has it always been R1 to R3? I thought the Carnegie classification went from R1 to R5. To my knowledge, Alicia, I think in the 21st and maybe the late 20th century, it's been R1 to R3. I don't know the history about Carnegie classification. I don't know if anybody else in the room or Sean knows, but currently I think it's just R1 to R3. And in fact, they don't use R1 to R3 too. They say highest universities with highest, higher and high research activity. So then Theodore asked, what is the startup fund and do all positions come with one? So Theodore's question on the chat is, do all positions come with startup funds? Not necessarily. Most research-related positions come with funds. Also, if the positions require you to do some service and that the services comes with some dollar amount, then there might be some startup funds. But typically, not all positions will come with the startup funds. All right. Sarah's asking, how important is the ability to secure internal and external grants during the training phase? I would say it is moderately important, but not required. It's great that you're able to secure grants, whether it's internal or external, but it's not required in most disciplines. There's a star there. I'll come back to the star later. What's more important is having exposure to grant writing, having exposure to the mechanisms of grant development, so that you know how to raise funds for the work that you do. That is more important than actually having some grants in your portfolio. Even small grants like the travel grants that you do for GPSC, grants that you do for conferences, all of that is valuable, because regardless of what you're asking money for, selling your idea and convincing them that your idea is good enough to be funded is a worthwhile skill to have. Can you negotiate for a startup fund, or is that something that is just offered? Negotiation is always on the table, but there's usually a box within for negotiation. So you start somewhere. I'm just going to pick a random number, 150K. Let's say 150K is your is the average startup fund for a certain discipline. Then that's where you can work with. If you're asking for more, then you have to justify why do you need more. Some research requires either specialized equipment or specialized human resources, so you could negotiate for additional. But if your typical range is 150 and you're asking for $1 million, that may not work. So, but negotiation is always up on the table.
And I'm just going to pipe in real quick, and I'll send everybody an email about it. But we actually have 2 workshops on negotiating that come up after this series that are also amazing. So you can get a lot more in-depth information. But that is fabulous. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jordan. Sarah, remind me in about 20 minutes if I don't address that star about funding. If you could ping me on chat, I'll remember to address that. All right, so let's get to our pathways. What we're going to do is in the next 50 minutes, so we want to make sure that we have some idea of these 3 broad pathways. Academic, although it's I said the session was academic pathways, we are also going to talk a bit about non-academic but related pathways, and then self-designed pathways that might as well be in academia, but I'll give you some examples of what self-designed pathways mean. So we'll spend a lot of time with academic. The majority of the time we'll be here, and then we will go to non-academic and self-defined pathways. So we'll start with academic, and we are broadly classifying it as independent and mentored versus sponsored. So independent, I call this independent because for a couple of reasons. One is you are more independent in what you do in the position, whether it's research, whether it's education, whether it's service. You have a lot of agency in how you run your programs, whether it's education or research. And there's also some independence when it comes to the funding source itself. You have a bit more accountability for raising funds for the work that you will do. So your salary might be covered, but you may be responsible for raising money for the work that you do. Mentored, on the other hand, or sponsored, on the other hand, is both the actual expectations or the work responsibilities and the funds are sponsored by some entity around you. So there's usually a research idea or research project that somebody else defined, and you are mentored or sponsored on that particular project. And then you don't have to worry about funds. Somebody else is taking care of your the funds for your project and your salaries. And that's the distinction I make between independence and mentored or sponsored positions. So we'll spend some time talking about independent positions. So broadly classified them into tenure track positions in R1 to R3, tenure track positions in the other two Carnegie classifications, which is masters or 4-year and 2-year universities. And then finally, there's practitioner or educator positions. So let's start with our independent positions. So here you can see the breakdown between our 3 broad responsibilities: research, teaching and mentoring, and service. So if you are in a tenure track position in a research university, then the big part is going to be research. And then you're expected to do teaching and mentoring and service as well. A common FAQ we get at this point is, what is the split? The common split on paper is 40-40-20. But in reality is 60-30-10 or 70-20-10. So all indicating that there's more emphasis to research, and then comes teaching and then service. And that is a very bad model for how you think about the split up. I always like to think about these 3 areas as very interconnected and very integrated. My teaching and mentoring is very related to the research, and my service responsibilities also aligns with what I do as an educator and researcher. So I always try to find connections between the 3. So it's hard to define a percentage. However, that's what we do in the community. So the short answer is 40-40-20 is the common, but in reality, it's either 60-30-10. That's the split up if you're in this first bucket. Tenure track positions in any other institution that is not a research university. You see there's no research component here. Here, the emphasis is teaching and mentoring. Your responsibility is to advance the mission of their university or college in the context of education. You're not expected to do research. So teaching and mentoring would be the biggest part here. And so that would anywhere between 60-80% would be teaching, and then 10-20 would be service to your institution, your department, or the professional service. Now, you might ask, does that mean that I don't get to do any research? That's not the case. You could do research if it interests you, as long as you can also engage the students that the university or the college serves. For example, you could engage undergraduate students in research experiences, or you could collaborate with the research universities and build a research program. So Yes, you could do research, but that's not generally expected in these institutions, M1 to M3 or community colleges or four-year institutions. And then professors or educator positions. So these are, the reason I put them in under independent is these are longer term emerging positions in many universities. We have several of them, including in our own institution. Here, you don't have to worry about your raising money for your salary, but it's still a long-term position. And there's two common positions here. One is professors of practice. So these are people who would work in the field, regardless of what the field is, or in industry for several years, and they would come back and share their industry experience or field experience with the students. And they are typically called professors of practice. There's also professor educators. These are longer term positions. And when we get to these sponsored positions, we talk about non-tenure track. And a common question we get is, do these educator positions, are they similar to their non-tenure track teaching positions? Probably yes. But this is emerging, it's more of an emerging trend within higher education institutions where you have long-term contracts for these practitioner or educator positions. And that's why I put them on here. So those are the different mix and match for the independent positions. We are ready to look at examples. So I'm going to pull up some examples, and I'd like you to start putting in some questions on what we just talked about. Any questions related to independent positions or the research, teaching, mentoring, and service components. And I'll get a few examples for us to look at. And Sean, if you could, there are questions. If you could read them out, that would be helpful while I pull up the examples.
Will do.
Okay, we are ready. So I'm going to put a link on chat, higheredjobs.com, and that's the site we are going to use for our discussion today. And I'm going to share my screen.
So we have a question. Is it possible to go from an R1, R3 to say an M1, M3? And how hard might that be?
Great question, Stephen. We usually have the other way around. People ask, is it possible to go from an M1 to a research university? Yes, I'm going to address that.
Another question is, does the tenure clock always reset if you switch from one tenure track position to another at a different university? Another question is, I assume it'll depend on disciplines, but how many papers are you expected to publish before graduation? Another question is, what happens if you are in a tenured track position and you are unable to secure grants?
Mm-hmm.
And another question is, which position requires one to raise their own funding?
Outstanding questions. So what we use are examples to answer all of those questions. So, sorry. So what I'm going to do is pick an example here. So I'm going to do faculty first. I'm going to review our participant list, and I'm going to pick cognitive science. Is it cognitive science, Theodore? Let's see if I can find cognitive
neuroscience.
Cognitive neuroscience.
Cognitive neuroscience with a specialization in neuroimaging, which is why I asked about the startup funds, because neuroimaging is really expensive. So I assume that, I mean, hopefully if I get hired, they know to give me money to scan people, because that's really expensive.
Yes, yes, certainly. Let's answer that question. don't see cognitive science or neuroscience in
It's
the.
usually in psychology or around psychology for some reason.
Okay, and then I'm going to. Okay, let's do this. Assistant Professor of Cognition. And what I encourage others to do is use your background, and you can find positions that are relevant to you and your discipline. And we might do other examples too. So the first thing we need to look at is, as you can see here, posted just yesterday. So the reason we have this session at the very beginning of the fall semester is this is when all of the positions start coming out. This is our typical cycle when all of the call for applications start for fall 2023 start date. And the first thing we need to do is University of New Hampshire. So a good place to look at the institutional identity is Wikipedia, and it says it's a public university, land grant, just like ours, and it's a research university. I'm not too sure if it's classified as R1 or R2. I'm going to go with R1. If Sean, if you could look, search in the back end, and we'll come back and figure out whether it's R1 or R2. But let's unpack these positions. It says the Department of Psychology at the University of New Hampshire invites applications for 2 positions in the fall of 2023 with the focus on human cognition, broadly defined as psycholinguistic, cognitive neuroscience, perception, and decision-making. So these first 2 lines are key for any application. So if they define a focus area, it means that that's the area that they're more interested in, even though they say the area of expertise within human cognition is open. These are important keywords for applicants. So what that means is we have to look internally and ask ourselves, does this fit into what I am doing? And is this the type of institution that I want to be a part of? So the first thing you need to do is look at the focus area that they're asking. And then we are particularly interested in faculty members who will enhance competitiveness for external funding through collaborations that bridges psychology and other disciplines such as computer science, biology, and education. So another keyword is the type of position. So this is our tenure track position in a research university. And Sean confirmed that it is an R1 institution, R2, Sean, or R1? Very high, it's R3.
You know, they don't like to list that anymore in the actual, when you look up the institutions. They just like to call it very high, which I think is an R1.
Yeah, let's just say it's a research university. That's enough for our conversation. So, and I want to answer the question from Sanjukta about which positions require to raise your own funds. Most tenure track positions in research universities expect you to raise funds for your research. You're given startup funds for the first 2 to 3 years, and then for your research, you're expected to raise your own money. So in fact, they say that in the job description itself. So we confirmed that this is a tenure track position in a research university. The focus areas are listed here. And then in terms of expectations, in addition to research, this is another sentence that clarifies our question before. History of or strong potential for external funding is desirable, not necessarily required, but desirable. And then they list methodologies that they're looking for. And they also define what is the standard teaching load. Is 2 courses per semester, which means 4 courses per year. So going back to our research, teaching, and service load, if you say 40% is teaching, I define 40% as 2 courses for entire year, 1 course per semester. 2 per semester, 4 per year is actually a lot. Imagine teaching 2 courses per semester just for a second. It means that you're meeting with your classes for at least 6 hours per week. That is the actual class time. And then preparation for class time is 2 per course. So that's 4 hours. That's already 10. And then office hours and emails, that's easily 20 hours per week. And we need to find time from space to do the rest of the work. So I would say 2 is a lot for this position. I think those are some key things in this position. What I would like is an example from somebody else. If you are looking at a position and you'd like us to unpack it, if you could put the link on chat, let's use that as an example for us to talk about. Okay, I have one from Angie. Sean, do you still see my screen? Assistant professor, exercise science.
Yes.
Track.
Yep.
Okay. Cincinnati. Thank you, Angie. So this is my alma mater, so I can tell you everything about Cincinnati. Cincinnati is a public university. It's an R1. It's a comprehensive university. So we can skip all of this stuff and then directly go to the expectation. This is a 9-month tenure track. Assistant professor of exercise science position is responsible for an active research agenda, which includes publishing, presentations, grant writing, teaching a diverse set of undergraduate and graduate courses, including online. I don't know if they say how many courses. Assisting with program growth and community and professional service, all of the standard stuff. Do they define anything beyond exercise science as the focus area? Probably not. But they have an overview of their student body and the kinds of programs they have in the department. So that will give you some sense about what your teaching and mentoring load would look like. And then minimum requirements, PhD in the field that they're applying to. A research agenda, teaching a variety of courses. Okay, so there was a question about what does this 9-month actually mean? So most tenure track positions, you get salary for 9 months, which is your fall and spring semester. And your summer is usually open, meaning that you get to raise funds for the 3 additional months through research funds or through other mechanisms. So when you write grant proposals, you usually write in your summer months in your budget. That's what you do if you're a 9-month tenure. So you write your door. You are paying yourself for the additional 3 months. It's usually called supplemental compensation in addition to your salary. That is one model. The other model is some schools or colleges will define the percentage of salary that you are responsible for. Instead of the months, they say you are responsible for 30% of your salary. We will pay you 70%. You raise your funds for 30%. And that also means that for the 30%, you get to define what you want to do. So that's the cool part about raising funds. I know raising funds sounds scary, but if you're raising your funds, you get to do what you love, and you get to define what you want to do. So for summers, I always define what projects I'm working on, and I get funds from those projects. And I also some summers I can decide and say, well, 2 weeks I'm going to take off. I'm not going to work for 2 weeks, and I don't get paid for 2 weeks. So those are some different cost models. And what does diversity and inclusion usually mean when it comes to recruitment, or internally students considered as a diverse candidate? So are international students considered as a diverse candidate? So let's go back to what they're talking about. So teaching a diverse set of undergraduate and graduate students, or sometimes people say commitment to diversity and inclusion. So I'll give you my interpretation of what that means is when they say they are looking for you to contribute to their inclusive mission or diversity mission, they're asking about what are your perspectives about creating an inclusive culture. Your student body is certainly going to be diverse, regardless of what your institution type is going to be, and what philosophies or what practices would you adopt in your education and mentoring programs to be more inclusive. That is one interpretation for what diversity and inclusion means. Are international students considered diverse? I think diversity really means that from an applicant standpoint, they want different types of applicants. They don't want one type of applicant overrepresented in their applicant pool. That is what they mean by that is what it means to applicants applying. So I would say international candidates or scholars are also considered to be diverse. So I usually don't tag diverse to an individual. So you can't ask, is a person diverse? So it is more about a community, right? Is the community more diverse? Is your student population more diverse? Is your applicant pool more diverse? But the short answer, I get what you're asking. I think yes, international scholars are also considered at the same level as other candidates.
And Vignesh, Alicia asked, do people use the term alma mater to talk about where they got their bachelor's or last institution they graduated from?
Great question. If it's alma mater is usually for the terminal degrees, whatever the terminal degree is for you. But some people call all of their institutions that they've been a part of as alma mater. So to me, both University of Alabama and Cincinnati are alma mater. Sean, what about you?
I have a bachelor's and master's from the U of A, and they are my alma mater. Yeah. But a PhD elsewhere, which is also my alma mater. So, yeah. And Theodora asked about, do tenure track positions offer 401k matching?
Typically, it's not tied to tenure track positions specifically. I think it's tied to any position at a university. Most universities do. If you're a public university, you have 401. It's not called 401k like the industry, but some sort of a retirement matching. And it differs from state to state. So Arizona has an Arizona retirement plan, and they define how the matching works. Okay. I'd like to look at one more example. If anybody readily have a community college position or a four-year institution, in front of you. If you could put it in chat, I would appreciate it. If not, I can easily find one. Okay, I think I have one. Okay, this is Emerson College in Boston, Massachusetts. It's a private college. I don't know if they're private. Let's double check if they're for profit or non-profit. I don't know.
They're not for profit.
Non-for-profit, okay, great.
Yeah. And they're under master's colleges and universities' larger programs because they do have master's programs.
Okay. So this one, they're looking at a tenure track position in media psychology in the School of Communications. And since it's a master's college or university, you can see that the primary role will be to help and develop, teach undergraduate courses to the core curriculum. And they've given examples. So as you can see, there's less of emphasis on research, more on teaching and service. So for these kinds of positions, if you're applying to community colleges or four-year institutions or master's colleges or in universities, what should you do during your training phase? It's important that you have exposure to teaching and mentoring, doing teaching assistantships, or at some point in your PhD, if you're able to even lead a course or teach a course in your discipline, I think that would be valuable. Mentoring undergraduate students or even junior graduate students, or that's also a welcome aspect for your portfolio. And making sure, so here you would ask, do these courses fall under your interest areas? Are you able to teach them? Does it interest you? Does it excite you? If so, then you could shortlist this position for application. So Rex is asking, why should we avoid for-profit universities? Why I avoid for-profit universities is their mission and the way they approach the education is very different from public or nonprofit private universities. And of the 4,000, the number of for-profit universities is very, very small. And they run their institutions like a business or a corporate model versus an educational institution. So I think I would not be able to do justice to the expectations of a pathway in a for-profit institution as I could do for the other institutions, and that's why I avoid them. All right.
There's a question about what an endowed professorship means, and is there a large salary discrepancy between the three independent pathways?
Okay. So endowed positions. Endowed positions are usually for mid-level or senior positions, and you would require an external entity like a donor to endow your position. And you can think about it more like a startup fund for a senior position. So if you're applying for a department head position or a full professor, and if it's endowed, then it comes with a big startup money, and you could use that for your own research or education program. That's what endowed positions usually mean. And then the other question was, is there a salary discrepancy between the three pathways? Let's see. I want to pull the slides back so we have. So the question is, how do the salaries match across these three? I think it's very, very dependent on the institution type and the position type. So I would think that there's a lots of synergy or alignment between tenure track positions, whether it's in the research institution or in a teaching institution, whether it's in this bucket or in this bucket, your salaries are going to be slightly similar, not including the supplemental compensation for. So I don't have good numbers on how much of disparity, if there's any, between these three positions. And then I also want to address and add a lot of caveat before we move on to the next pathway, in the interest of time, is the funding mechanisms. How much of funding experience do you need? So I try to be discipline agnostic as I give examples, or I give more examples for every discipline. Because for most questions, the most common answer is it really depends on the discipline, right? So I want to give you a few examples. So in let's say in social sciences and humanities, and even in computing, physical sciences, and in engineering, I think having a general exposure to funding and grantmanship is good. If you go in and apply to a position with no idea how to raise money or how to write a proposal, I think that's problematic. But there's no expectation that you should have had some funding on your own to apply for a faculty position. In some disciplines, like the life sciences, I would say in cell biology, molecular biology, there is a predefined pathway from grad student to faculty position, and there's also a lot of specific funding mechanisms associated with it. For example, you would first do what it's called a K0 grant, which is right after grad school. You would do a K00, and then you would do an NIH F23, which is a funding mechanism for postdoctoral scholars, and then there's an F31 NIH grant program. I know this might sound like Greek and Latin to some of us, and it's not a field that I come from, but I know that several people go through that pathway. Literally, it's a pathway defined, and that requires you to do write grant proposals on your own before you apply for faculty positions. So there's a lot of hidden curriculum in different disciplines. So we need you talk to your mentors and figure out what is the mechanism to go for a faculty position. Do we have to write grants? Do we have to have our own grant proposals? How many publications should we have? We've covered examples. So I want to address these two FAQs. What matters for a tenure track position? For a tenure track position in a research institution, I think independence matters. So you should have independent research ideas that you will pursue as a part of your tenure track position. And you should have some track record to support your research agenda in the form of publications or presentations. So those are key elements for tenure track position in a research university. For other universities, definitely having some teaching experience matters. Does this mean that teaching doesn't matter for a tenure track position in a research universities? Not at all. It matters, but at different stages. So when you go to the final decision making between 3 candidates and they're looking at all of them have good research experience, they all fit the bill on what you're looking for, and then but one person has teaching experience in courses that the department needs, then that gives you a leg up. So teaching definitely helps, and experience definitely helps in whatever position you apply. Do I need to fulfill all of the qualifications in the job posting list out? Probably not. But however, in one of the examples, we saw that they list specifically areas or courses that they're looking for. And those are things that you definitely need to fulfill before you start applying. If it's in your periphery or if you don't have expertise in those areas, it's not worth applying for those positions. So I'm going to move to the next pathway before answering the other questions on chat. And Sean, if when we get there, if you could help organize those thoughts, and that would be great. So moving on to our second broad category within academic careers is mentored or sponsored positions. Here we're looking at non-tenure track research professorships, tenure track teaching professorships, postdoctoral scholars. I see at least 5 to 6 of you registered in this, and then staff or research scientists. So this is self-explanatory. So this is a postdoctoral position after your grad school. And then you could also pursue staff or research scientist positions. And this is becoming more common in several disciplines, including social sciences. And then there's this non-tenure track research professorships or teaching professorships. So the only difference between tenure track and non-tenure track research or teaching positions is it's already sponsored, and you have a specific project that you will contribute to. If you're in a non-tenure track research professorships, 100% is research. You can do service outside, but for your position, you're focused on your research, and your projects and research projects are already defined to some extent. Non-tenure track teaching, 100%, it's teaching load. And in this case, the average is 5 courses per year. Sometimes it's 3 to 4 per semester. And I'd like you to reflect on that after the session. Think about what would it take to teach 4 courses per semester. It's almost 60 hours per week. So short answer. So that's these 2 positions. And let's look at a few examples. And I know the lingering question is jumping between pathways. How do we jump between these different pathways? We're going to address that. So if anybody has examples already, I'd like to pick them. If not, I'm going to look at the participant list. And let's see. Spanish literature. So Sean, how much time do we have? 15 more minutes or 30 more minutes? You're muted.
Muted. We end at 1:45, so 15 more minutes.
15 more minutes, okay. Trying to find a good one.
See if that one, I just posted one, see if that one might work. It's a DePaul assistant professor, Department of Modern Languages.
Is DePaul private?
Yes.
Nonprofit.
Yes, I believe is it one of the Jesuit schools? Can't remember. I should know this. I used to teach at a Jesuit school. Don't tell them I can't remember who the sister Jesuit schools are.
Okay, so DePaul University and I think it's a private Catholic university, likely nonprofit. And they're looking for, this is tenure track. Sean, is there a non-tenure track that we can?
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Let me pick this one. This is a non-tenure track position at Rutgers University. It's a research university, but the position itself is non-tenure track, and they're looking for folks to teach interdisciplinary courses, and there are a few specific courses that they listed, and usually they for non-tenure track positions, it's either the project or the courses that they will list in your job description and the amount of time the position is valid. So by default, all non-tenure track positions are 1 year, and then they extend it based on availability of funds or project extension. What does salary per credit mean? Is that in this position, Theodore, or? Yes, at the top. Oh, salary per credit. So it depends on how many credits you're teaching. So they define the salary by credit. They say, let's say 1,200 per credit, and for a 3-credit course, you get 3,600. So that's salary per credit. And quite common for non-tenure track teaching positions. It's either by credit or by course. And for research tenure track positions, it's by project. So I want to answer the question about switching between pathways, and so for a non-tenure track research position, it is likely to lead to an independent tenure track research position. Same with non-tenure track teaching professorship. If you're in a non-tenure track teaching position, it is likely to lead an independent position in a tenure track teaching position. So postdoctoral fellowships are most likely going to lead you to a tenure track position. Staff and research scientists might be, that's a different career pathway. You might stay on as a research scientist or a staff scientist in academia. That's becoming very, very common. So this is less likely to lead to an independent position in the past, unless you define this as an independent position by itself. So what factors go into making that decision is, remember we talked about the splits or the components between research, teaching, and service. It is about being prepared for readiness for an independent position. If you're in a non-tenure track research professorship, you build in more publications or grant writing experience, so that you're well prepared for a tenure track position in a research university. Same with teaching professorships. It's unlikely that if you're in a non-tenure track teaching professorship, that it will transition into a tenure track research position. I say unlikely because in a non-tenure track teaching position, you're teaching 5 courses per semester. There's not enough time for you to be ready to be independent to continue your research program. So which makes our application less competitive. So that's why I say it is unlikely. So some common questions between postdoc versus direct faculty positions. As I said earlier, it is common in some social science disciplines, computer science, engineering, that people directly go from grad school to faculty positions. And what decides that is how ready you are and how independent you are and how much track record you have built during your training program. So if you feel that you're ready and if you have a good track record, I think you should apply to directly to a faculty position. However, if you feel that, no, I think I do need some more mentorship and some more training to better define and scope out my discipline, my research areas, build up my publication record, then a postdoctoral position is recommended. The second question, this was in the registration, what should postdoctoral scholars keep in mind if they're preparing for tenure track positions? Is again, keeping in mind, you have to be very, very selfish if you're a postdoctoral scholar. It is about you. It is not about the project that you are currently a part of. You of course have to contribute to the project you're leading, but it's more about getting that necessary mentorship so that you could be independent. So make sure that your PIs or mentors are sponsoring you to be a part of projects that would generate publications, are inviting you to be a part of grant proposals, helping you write your own research grant proposals. I think those need to be a part of your postdoctoral mentorship plans. So hopefully that answered some of the questions related to that. Is it possible to stay on in the non-tenure track position? Yes, I think that is totally fine. We could stay on in a non-tenure track position. It is a matter of making sure that your contract is renewed and you have a secure pathway for 5 to 10 years. So if you can get a commitment from your institution or department that they would renew your contract and they have a need, then I think, yes, you could stay on as a non-tenure track person. I'm going to address the other questions after I finish this pathway, which is the third group, which is non-academic positions. As I said, we're going to just scratch the surface. So there are research and discovery and innovation positions outside of academia. And the scope or circle of academia has actually broadened. And there is a gray area between a university and a federal and a state position. So I would even consider these as kind of academic positions. So you get to do field work or research work in federal agencies like the Department of Energy or Food and Drug Administration or National Science Foundation, or in national labs and foundations like Sandia, Oak Ridge, and Hudson Alpha. There's lots of STEM and humanities positions in these labs or foundations. And at the end, I will provide links on where to find them. And you will also get to do research in industry or research and discovery positions in industry. And there's certainly engineering and technical positions in the industry, but for social sciences and health sciences and life sciences, there's research positions in industry labs. But what is the difference here is you get less agency to define what you want to do. It is often driven by what the industry wants to do, and the projects are already defined and you get to contribute to them rather than you running your projects. In federal agencies, there is some flexibility. You get to run your own labs like you would do in academia. So those are non-academic positions. And then I also want to cover self-designed pathways. So these are broadly defined as, these are not pathways that are defined and out there. It is something that you have to go after or create by yourself. So most of the entrepreneurial startup positions are defined by yourself. There are many people after their PhD, they become experts in their area, and they define, they build a consulting company, and they take projects in on a regular basis as an expert in their field. So consultants is also a self-defined pathway. There are some non-traditional positions that that are very few, but you have to go after and create for yourselves. There is an increasing need for PhDs in the K-12 school system, in the areas of counseling, psychology, STEM education. There's also nonprofit research and outreach positions in museums, museums of science, for example, and then grant development, policy development, international development. So if you think about it, those are things that you would do in your PhD, but you could repackage that into a career after your PhD. But the caveat here is you have to design this, and that's why I call it a self-designed pathway. So as I mentioned at the start, this is the great time where the recruitment cycle kicks in. Call for applications starts in summer, and applications are prepared during fall. Applications are in before Thanksgiving. The screening interviews or Zoom interviews happen in December and Jan. Campus interviews in spring. And you get to make great decisions, life-changing decisions late spring, and then you move in summer, start your position next fall. That's the typical recruitment cycle, but there's always phased positions. You'll have off-cycle positions. I want to emphasize the 3 Ps, the position, place, and people. So first you need to pick the area of interest, and then you need to decide on what your position is, what your place, and who you want to work with. Here are 3 to 4 online agents that you could use for searching all your pathways. higheredjobs.com, which we used. Academic Keys is very similar. National Labs for the non-academic pathways. Imagine PhD also has some ideas for some self-defined pathways, and certainly your own network is a place where you can get some more information. I'm going to skip all of that. And I want to say this is just the start. There's a whole set of series coming in, and Sean will post a reminder on what's next in the series. So you could learn more about the applications. I want to quickly address some of the questions there and close out the conversations. Why is tenure desirable? Flexibility, agency, and security. I think it's more about a philosophical view about academic freedom. I think that's where tenure comes from. You get to do what you love, and you get to define what you love and do. So that's what tenure is, but it's changing because of various socioeconomic, sociopolitical reasons. It is changing why tenure is desirable. That is a week-long conversation, right? So I think we need to get coffee or tea to talk about that question. Is there more information about consulting? And that's a question for Sean. I think that requires some more experts. I think having a dedicated self-designed pathway workshop would be something we could design, Sean. I'm going to hang out for another 5 minutes to talk to all of you and answer any questions, but I invite Sean to stop the recording and thank all of you. This has been one of the most engaged groups. The reason I ran over time and breadth is because of the great questions that all of you had. And I don't know if I addressed every single question to the extent I wanted to. So I'll hang out for some more time and speak to anybody who wants to chat.
Thank you, Vignesh. And I will stop